Chapter 15. The command echelon of the 426th is summoned with sudden urgency. No regard is paid to time. Tyrion himself is Abed. Lieutenant Colonel Siapu had to be chased down by shore patrol. She was found waist-deep in a Lehman Russ's engine compartment changing the vehicle's oil filter. 15 minutes later, they are in their prime uniforms, standing with their equivalents from the other 9 regiments. Tyrion brushes aside Ravenna's mocking grins and finds Tinsley. "What's going on?" Tyrion asks. "I hear we've dropped out of warp to transmit." "I don't know, Colonel." Tinsley shakes his head and looks around. "If we've dropped out of warp, then we are at the final rally point. Mike, we're the last ship. The invasion fleet would be complete, Mike. Within a dozen light years, the entirety of the Emerald Fleet and escorts prepares to weigh alongside an Astartes invasion force. Prepare to come alive, Colonel." In truth, they can only speculate. And in typical fashion, after the urgency in pulling them all together, they mill around aimlessly for direction. Siapu finds a rare place to sit and tries to remove grease from under her nails. From one moment to the next, an explosion of activity storms through the corridor. A dozen naval officers move urgently through the milling guard officers, followed by a handful of tech adepts and a small army of scribes who continue on. At last, Brigadier Leet arrives with a group of his own entourage of aides and clerks. As correct and proper as the man is, he is disheveled, haggard even. His eyes are bloodshot and he's unshaven. He doesn't smell, but he looks like he ought to. He mumbles an apology as an aide presses a paper cup of caffeine into his hand. He throws this back in a single draft and shucks his uniform coat and then his unadorned tunic. Leet passes this laundry and empty cup off to a different aide. "I apologize for the urgency," Leet begins. As he speaks, another orderly presses a new cup of caffeine into his hand, and he clutches this between his teeth and dons a fresh tunic that yet another orderly presents him with. When his arm is sleeved, he takes the cup to hand and speaks again. "I'll bottom line it. An updated figure has been reported from the ship's navigators. They've reduced our ETA by 140 hours. We've been sequestered in strategy symposiums for 2 straight days." The milling colonels hang on every word as if there may be a test on it later. Leet pauses again, consumes the cup of caffeine, and then shrugs into a clean overcoat. It's the same effect as 8 hours of rack time and a boiling shower. "We have only a few moments here. This is an Astartes operation. We are in a support role. The rights and privileges of the Astartes are under extreme scrutiny here. But they are not under scrutiny by us, am I clear? We have a chain of command and a logistics apparatus to fall back upon, and they only have their honor. There is an order of things. And you are all smart enough to understand what I mean without having to explain it further. If they speak to you, they are all to be addressed as my lord. Is that clear?" Nods and murmured assent make their reply. "Good. This is a matter of the rights of Dominion, not a matter of bloody conquest. Nothing is final yet, but it looks like we are going to be held in a support role to occupy and protect civilian infrastructure. This should cordon off the civilians so the loyalists can come to grips with the secessionist Astartes with relative freedom. Peace can break out from one moment to the next, and it's our job to maintain those preconditions." Leet looks to each of them in turn, with a conspiratorial air to him. "Be respectful, but remain pragmatic. We are the professionals here. The Astartes are just romantics. Any questions?" A moment passes without a spoken word. "Didn't think so. Let's go." The procession of officers enters the tactical amphitheater and steps down through the tiered seating. Below, in the pit, a blue-gray planet rotates just above the hololithic emitter. At the heart of this briefing is a Gobei-class servitor, a pair of young twins, conjoined to a bank of cogitators by dozens of bronze pipes. Through this abominable device, inputs are collected. Combat simulations are run, and outputs are projected. Through this monstrosity, the fate of the campaign can be vivisected and rationalized. A few pictures are secreted throughout the auditorium, and banks of monitors hang suspended by an enormous overhead bronze crane. There are dozens of naval officers operating this equipment, as well as a fair few tech adepts. But when he sees the enormous robed figure enter the stage, he shudders. He had no idea there were any aboard ship. He is inhuman, some misshapen product of an unnatural birth. That he could be so big and move so delicately unlimber some revulsion from deep within Tyrion, something akin to a fear of Xenos or arachnids. The last of the naval officers and audience take their seats. A few participants from various other and unknown uniformed services have joined as well. Without any preamble, the briefing commences. The picked screens flicker to life, revealing the faces of other divisional officers, the skippers who would never abandon their bridges, astropaths, as well as the Astra Militarium's senior-most headquarters command. The faces all flex and twist in strange ways, and he cannot focus in on them individually or in total. Instead, he is forced to focus in on the centermost screen where the Lord High Commander Varant Ortayce stands in his own strategium. He stands there in full plate. Flanking him are representatives of the Marines Errant, the Raptors, the Salamanders, as well as the Fire Angels. Our human predecessors, who have since been executed as ambitious heretics, tried to force the Sagan system and failed. Ortayce begins. Long-range Auspex has revealed an alternate route into the Maelstrom sector. He indicates the spinning blue orb between the Astartes, the mirror of the one displayed in Marine's battle barge. In 10 days' time, after one final translation, we will begin our assault on the Viania system. The attack will take place in 3 phases. Phase 1. The Navy, with Astartes forces in reserve, will break any picket forces present. Simultaneously, 2 companies of Red Scorpions will launch from strike cruisers to board and neutralize orbital defense platforms. As he speaks, the holo-emitter changes in aspect, and the color of the orbital platforms changes from blue to green. Once the picket is broken, the Emerald Fleet will then enter orbit. Departing from the Ultima Ratio, the 429th Division will occupy these defense platforms to relieve the Red Scorpion strike force. This establishes the commencement of Phase 2, ground invasion. Naval intelligence has mapped out and ranked installations relative to their strategic merit. Alpha priority targets would be defined as anything required to continue the war effort near term: primary war material stores, ammunition depots, promethium refineries, and terrestrial orbital defensive fortifications. Beta priority would be the next tier: primary reactors, munitions factories, machine yards, and logistics infrastructure. A majority of the opposing Astartes forces are rationally expected to be found in defense of Alpha and Beta targets. Zeta and Delo priority are considered civilian-grade infrastructure, and they are anticipated to be defended in a commensurate way. We wish to consolidate the fighting away from the better part of the civilian population. Resiliency of civilian infrastructure is critical to the long-term survival of this planet's strategic value. Therefore, available Astra Militarum forces will be utilized to contest and control these minor targets. This should signal to the enemy their ability to prepare and fortify high-priority targets, so that my Astartes forces have a free hand to engage far from civilians. They're communicating with violence, Tyrion comments aloud, absent-mindedly. Seated behind Tyrion, Tinsley leans forward. What do you want to bet naval intel source that data directly from the guilders that own those facilities? Tyrion frowns at this, and they both earn a chastising glare from Leet, who is seated directly beside Tyrion. As the Lord High Commander speaks, the hologram changes to illuminate different runes consistent with the tiered ranking and their relative geographic position. We are not here to bring annihilation to this planet. In order to preserve the largest portion of the civilian infrastructure, our plan is to utilize the Astra Militarium to contest and occupy the Zeta and Delo targets in these vicinities. Our hope is that this will concentrate the loyalist Astartes in these 3 regions with the highest density of Alpha and Beta priority targets. The end result will be a consolidation of the conflict with the warders to these 3 areas. Divisions 425th through 428th are tasked with terrestrial assault, Ortayce states. And then division by division, regiment by regiment, the plan of attack is rationalized. Naval Intel populates the twins with the simulation criteria, and regiment by regiment, each commander's assault is projected a success within acceptable casualty limits. And in this way, victory is assured. The 10 regiments of the 425th are processed very quickly, and Tyrion struggles to reserve full attention. He tries to smile enthusiastically, but it feels too much like malicious compliance. So he then scowls in serious contemplation, but that feels vaguely confrontational. So he sits there, polite, dumb, a forced void inside and out. 2nd Regiment, 426th. Orte states. Tyrion stands and makes a military salute. My lord, he says, so deadened inside that it does not pain him to say it. Your target is a solvent plant. This is of no particular military value, but a substantial piece of the civilian economy in this northern province. Naval intelligence confirms the location of the plant at the northern tip of what appears to be an artificial peninsula. The continental scale of the hologram shifts to a frame of reference even more regional, a coastal zone at the northern meridians. You will land here at Elsie Magazine, a central park for the surrounding Hab complex. You will assault north through the complex to the peninsula. You will come across a body of water that may hinder advance. Naval intel suggests that this can be drained away by destroying a retaining dike. Then, your forces can move in and fully occupy the solvent plant, which is not to be destroyed. The tactical map is augmented by different surface-level pics cultivated from some deep intelligence archive. Some, like the pics of the park, are clearly dated and likely originated from a picnicker's casual efforts. The residential zones thin closer to the neck, where all structures vanish as the assault channel funnels into this constricted terrain. It would be a magnificently defensive choke point, and the grainy pics clearly came from a long-range surveillance probe. Yes, my lord, Tyrion says numbly. A good number of the vid screens below now hold his image. Intercepted Vox traffic reports that this position is currently held by the 82nd Badab Auxilla. At this, a few naval officers, likely intelligence assets, begin to formalize the simulation. When the inputs are correctly captured, the Gobe servitor closes their shared eye. There is a brief stink of ozone. When the result is projected, Tyrion goes cold all over. In 75% of over 1,000 simulated conflicts, the second is reduced below combat effectiveness before passing the neck. Of the regiments previously evaluated, this result is utterly unique. The 2nd Regiment will be defeated. Again, Tyrion sees his own face in the vid screens. He's gone sweaty. He looks disheveled. There he stands, a defeated man before he's even joined battle. Brigadier Leet. Orte's demands. This regiment is rated as PDF grade. Leet stands. A different rage passes over Tyrion. He must control it, he must. Yes, my lord, Leet says. We make do with the reinforcements the Munitorum provides. The attempted joke does wonders to lighten the tone of all the human officers in attendance, some of whom even guffaw. All except Tyrion, whose fragile ego is violently unbalanced by this. Ortes moves about, moving through different resources, considering alternative plans of action that might have meaningful consequence. Sir, we are better than this, Tyrion whispers as assertively as he dares. Now is not the time for this, Michael. I am better than this, Tyrion insists at the verge of outright panic. Leet's face turns to stone. Not according to your combat record. Not according to my evaluation. Be silent, now. My lord, Colonel Ravenna arises. When she speaks, it's like glass being ground. If I may, there are naval resources allocated to my operations at the hydroponics facility. My regiment will simply be moving too fast to leverage those resources fully. In support of my esteemed colleague, could we reevaluate the outcome if we shift the naval battery to support the 2nd? Ravenna smiles, more brightly than ever. He must control it, he must. Naval operators' reference tables to confirm the azimuth can be reached without disrupting the ship's course. A gunner nods, and the simulation's inputs are amended. A reticle is placed over Elsie Magazine, a preemptive strike to soften the beachhead. Tyrion studies the designated target, the Hab blocks. It's plainly a laborer's ghetto in support of this solvent plant. He counts windows and multiplies the sum by floors and then by complex. He estimates over 10,000 families live in that block of complexes. He wants to scream. With the changes captured, Ravenna's command only suffers a marginal increase in casualties, 0.1%. In exchange, Tyrion's command will occupy the solvent plant in a combat-effective state in 82% of the simulated battles. All that hung between defeat and victory is the massacre of 40,000 civilians in their homes. Tyrion sickens. He has never before felt so impotent. And the turmoil is transparent. His image on the vid screens look nothing like who he thought he was. Are you up for this, Colonel? Orteus leans in from the screen. The Colonel nods. It's all that he can do to keep from looking away. At length, he remembers himself. My lord, the second will not fail you. Good, Orteus says plainly and moves on. The conference takes another 6 hours. And not once in that time does Tyrion's impotent guilt decouple from his embarrassed rage. When the briefing concludes, he moves quickly, desperate to excise this feeling in solitude. Hey, Siapu shouts after Tyrion. He ignores this and keeps moving, desperate to escape. What the hell was that, Michael? But she gains on him. You're going along with this? Sia calls after. Tyrion can't escape. He's locked into an adrenal response, flush with sweat, vision constricted to pinpricks. He turns to face her. Naval intelligence isn't worth a wet shit, Sia, he says roughly. Fire missions get cancelled all the time. You're going to roll the dice on those people's lives? She growls, incredulous. With an unbridled fury, he bodily slams into her, pressing her against a bulkhead and holding her there with a forearm barred across her throat, lifting from her feet and pinning her there. The sudden impact forces a squeak of exhaled air from Sia's throat, but she is no weakling. Her hand clutches the side of his face, a manicured thumbnail resting against an eyeball. And so they remain at an impasse. Naked hatred passes between them. Their fires merge, with neither capable of backing down. They're going to bomb that complex, Sia growls out. And you didn't even challenge them. Michael, those people are going to die. And that's on the Astartes. You were in the same briefing, Tyrion spits back, close enough for Sia to smell the fear on him. Did you not see what was happening there? That was a real damned Astartes, and this is a real goddamn war. What was I to do? Mike, you refuse. If your god commands you to strangle a baby to show your faith, then you strangle your god instead. How are we even having this conversation? We are the Imperial Guard, damn you. Our duty is to protect humanity. Tyrion turns free of her and roughly shoves her into an adjoining corridor with much less foot traffic moving through it. Sia, he continues, something apologetic in his voice, though he will never show weakness by apologizing. This isn't some band of rag-ass renegades. That was a chapter master, a Lord High Commander, a Magister Militum backed by inquisitors and legates. Compliance is the only thing the Imperium tolerates. If we refuse, we will be put against a bulkhead and shot in the head. Do you not see that? They don't care about us. They don't care about those civilians. They'll kill everyone to keep the galaxy dominated. So what would you have me do in this situation? Leet has capable officers available, she says, in a voice that sounds like she's recently smoked too much. Tyrion, you ask for help. And then what? Damn it, Sia. Our continued existence is contingent upon honoring the terms of our obliteration decree. So we start borrowing officers. How long until stories about our past service starts filtering out to the division? How long until a snake eater slits some poor dumb bastard's throat and there's a divisional inquiry? Sia shakes her head. Tyrion reads this as her commiserating their situation when in fact she is grieved by Tyrion's obstinance when a solution is so readily available. Then maybe, Sia says, it would have been for the best if we had all died at the Spool River. Tyrion breathes, desperate to downregulate. Let's get Daemon, Ling, and Delaclos into conference, he says at length. 2 hours. We've got a lot of work to do to operationalize this. You're not going to tell them about the bombardment, are you? Sia states, detached. Not until I know for sure, Tyrion says, guardedly. You hold command here, Colonel. So that's your prerogative. But you hide this from them, Sia says, then you own it. Tyrion spends the time trying to resolve the chaos inside of him. He understands that he is unequal to the requirements of this life. Colonel Hess possessed a fatalism that Tyrion lacked. He searches his soul for something to blame. It could be a function of his youth, or a naivete he hasn't yet revealed. But it's more straightforward than that, he now understands. He's allowed his career with the Imperial Guard to take place under the faulty assumption that the sacrifice must have been related to some greater purpose. He forcibly relieves himself of that. And moving down through the working parts of the ship, he passes a large mural painted around an alcove, a makeshift place of worship for the ratings. The mural tells a story that Tyrion doesn't bother to study, but at the cavity he kneels and makes the sign of the Aquila. Votive candles smoke as he searches for the words. The recess is cluttered with icons, totems, and various objects of reverence that mean little to Tyrion. Except one. Carved from human bone and stained with blood, with the skill of a master artisan, is the unmistakable figure of the angel. Tyrion stares at this for a long time, before tenderly reaching his hand inside the alcove to lay the primarch on its side. Only then can he pray. Chapter 16. Desperate to downregulate. Colonel Sia Poo enters the quarters like a breacher storming a room. She couldn't have done it any finer if she'd carried a goddamned riot shotgun. The inhabitants' reaction is equivalent to a concussion grenade. Men panic, moving to cover contraband. Drinks are spilled. A Dessarian pokes a Gemini with a cigarette and cards are thrown into the air. The regiment's senior non-commissioned officers stand all at once and salute. This is done with such urgency it disturbs the table, sending chits cascading across the filthy floor. Everyone fold and get the hell out. Sia levels her eyes mercilessly at her quarry. DuPont. You stay, right where you are. Command Sergeant Major Kyle DuPont has not moved. He sits there, a crooked cigarette stabbed in the corner of his mouth, studying his cards. Upon her order, DuPont has implemented one of the most brutally punishing training regimens she had ever seen. And the old man was there, 20 hours a day, providing the troops with an example. If this busted old hump could top obstacles, so could they. And judging by the state of his quarters, he'd probably done most of the training stone drunk. She'd received dozens of formal complaints of excessive force. Over half of those complaints had been corroborated by company-level officers. She has this in the inside pocket of her coat in the event that she needs it. She allows a moment to pass while the other NCOs exit quickly, thankful that Pooh didn't bust them for intoxication. Sia eyes all the contraband alcohol laying around. A drinking man goes to heaven. Isn't that so, Sergeant? DuPont is more irritated than anything and finally folds his hand face up to show a soft run of regents. It was well known that the command sergeant major was the personal concern of Tyrion. For Colonel Pooh to address him in this way was unseemly and suggested a strained relationship between Pooh and Tyrion, or Tyrion and DuPont himself, which only amuses him. Keep your seat, Sergeant, she says. To tell you the truth, he leers at her. I wasn't planning on standing. Make yourself at home. He sweeps a welcoming gesture across his filthy quarters. DuPont's eyes are so glazed over she can't tell what color they are. He's gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles have gone white. The man is too drunk to stand. I need to speak to you, she says, and writes a chair to sit in. I need your advice. Well, that's a switch. He rolls his eyes. What troubles you, young colonel? He bends low to pick some cards up from the floor, and for a moment she thinks he will fall from his chair and sprawl out amongst the filth he lives in. But he doesn't, and he returns upright to meet her gaze. I need to speak candidly with you about Colonel Tyrion. I need help understanding his motives. Why would you want to go and do a thing like that? DuPont says. His voice is like gravel. We've done a good job of managing a combined regiment without falling to factionalism or favoritism, she says. To better run this regiment with aligned leadership, I hope that you might be able to offer some insight. You are both Dessarians, after all. Upright, cards in hand, he begins to shuffle the deck. The room reeks, mildewing sweat and stale tobacco smoke. That? Aligning your values with the colonel is a tricky thing, DuPont pontificates. The colonel himself can't do it. Don't deflect on me, Kyle. I'm sick of the Grok's shit misdirection and the runaround. You Dessarians are more evasive than a priest in a tax house. This is off the record, of course. What is it then, Colonel? DuPont cuts the cards and begins dealing out a game of primes. A player will receive 2 cards and then can draw additional cards until the player decides they have the higher prime number and the cards are shown. While straightforward, the game is incredibly complicated, with a play style that shifts dramatically based on the number of players. Generally, it's regarded as a gentleman's game, not anything as crude as a true gamble. As the sum in a hand grows, so too does the space between primes. Functionally, there is an upward limit of how many cards can be drawn based on the number of suits in the deck or cards in the run before it is impossible to arrive at a new prime. Each pair of starting cards has a specific strategy. Maneuvering to a larger prime is a process of running through diminishing probabilities. It is Pooh's absolutely favorite game. And if she could be regarded as a merely capable officer, she is an undeniable master of this game. A game while we speak? She looks at her cards, holding a 12. It's the absolute worst hand possible. With a suite running from 2 to 10, no card in the deck will get her to 13, and if she misses 17, it's a long way to 23. She takes a card and strikes out, with DuPont holding at a humble 5. Look, the Colonel is capable. He's certainly smarter and more creative than a gunline officer. Some days, he's downright inspired. But there's something else in there, something mercurial. I'm looking for perspective. I've worked with him for a while now, and there should be a shorthand between us, a common set of assumptions. But I can't anticipate him. I figure it might be something else, some Desarian code of honor I don't understand. It shouldn't be that complicated. We're both soldiers, Dash. But Tyrion isn't a soldier, DuPont says, only slurring slightly. He's a politician. Or a policeman. Or perhaps the intersection of both. He puffs on his cigarette and shuffles the cards again and then deals quickly. Sia looks at her cards, gets lucky from a 7 to an 11 and holds there. DuPont also takes a single card and flips a 23 over before collecting the hand. And as for honor, young Colonel, what use does a soldier have for honor? He shuffles again, fumbles, then gets it right on the second try. Honor for a soldier is a straightforward affair. You don't abandon your comrade, and you exercise some caution as to where you drop your ordnance. That's about it. She plays the hand out, going from a 4 to a 6 to 12 before folding without even letting DuPont show his 31. DuPont shuffles. Honor. Soldiers, DuPont stifles a bout of hiccups with a fist to his chest. No. Soldiers have precious little use for honor. Honor is difficult to define, and that's by design. Nation of enough size, 3 generations, for generations, the cultures and values are reflected in codified law. Honor, as you define it, serves another purpose. So, if it doesn't serve the values of the people, what value does it serve? Sia struggles with this question for some time as she plays the hand. She's drawn a natural 17. It's a perfect place to hold and a terrible place to test a theory. An alternate set of facts, she says, and an alternate set of values. Correct, DuPont says, and beats her with a 37. He then lays the cards down with an air of finality. In that framework, honor would only apply to a rarefied class that acts with a different code of conduct, that for some reason, understanding is shielded from outsiders. Why would that be? Sia asks. Because laws don't apply to pigs. He stabs out his cigarette. Oh, he plays the part well enough. And he shares the risk, and that's all I can really ask of any man. And he's got some real moments of brilliance. The way he rallied us at the Spool River. The way he charged, leading from the front with nothing but a bayonet. It was all puffery, of course. He only did it because he had to be seen doing it, or it never would have happened the way it did, and we would all be dead. It was, absolutely, a fantasia. But the courage was authentic. 2 compulsions from 2 realities. So where does that urgency for misdirection come from? She asks. It's never insubordinate in any real way. But it's like you're compelled to say the right things softly and the wrong things loudly. Oh, that. DuPont slurs as he reshuffles the cards, making a poor show of it. Well, Dasaria is a backwards place, and we do things backwards. There it is again, Sia says with a boom of frustration in her voice. Is that some mandate born of the Desarian household guard? He grows low. I was never a member of the Desarian household guard. Do not make that mistake again. His eyes burn like cigarette coals. And for a moment, she sees his true self, DuPont, the Skull Taker, one of the most dangerous men in the regiment, alive or dead. Of course, she knew he wasn't a member of the household guard. And it was a dirty pull to set him off like that. But even braced for his rampage, the magnitude of his potential for violence is terrible, and though she's expecting it, she nearly flinches. She takes up her cards. He does not. The household guard was an arm of the nobility, DuPont says, no less menacingly. they are chevaliers, and their privilege and burden is a moral requirement to act. Despite the rage, his words are sincere and transparent. That cord you wear, Sia, it's a Dessarian tradition, of course, marking out a cavalier from the soldiers. Did you know that? One of a few things you Gemini got from us. You understand, of course, the difference between a soldier and a warrior. A warrior does a thing because he esteems it as the most elevated state of being. A soldier fights in hope that he will be able to return to a state of peace. Peace is the ultimate victory for a soldier, wherein a cavalier can face defeat and pluck a victory from a codex of honor. The distinction is equivalent. So, having ridden the Blues Royal, you're closer to the household guard than I ever came. He grunts, then spits a wad of phlegm directly onto the deck. The way you talk about it, you must imagine the household guard as some regiment of horse, with plumed helmets set to a high burnish. If you do, that's because it's what you were meant to imagine. I was territorial militia. Compared to the peasantry, the militia got a more regular diet and was reasonably well clothed. I've been in uniform since I was 12 years old. A lot of men like myself, men like Comden Trist, joined the militia to keep suspicion off our families in hopes of sparing them from the purges. We were raised in a world where misdirection was a precondition of survival. She lays her cards down, forgetting the game. I'm a soldier, DuPont. And I'm not going to tell stories out of school. You can trust me. Oh, Sia, he says, softening immensely. And for the first time, she sees that the gray in his eyes is the beginning of a cataract. I know I can trust you. Because, fundamentally, we are both soldiers. And we do fight in the name of peace. But the reality is that we will never know peace. Unless we are cashiered out, the wars will consume us. She begins to open her mouth again, but he makes a subtle gesture, utterly unknown to her, but so essentially clear. Ears everywhere. Oh, Sia, how I trust you. Because you and I are both soldiers. And we understand that a soldier's lot is to endure and wait for the right opportunity. And the opportunity has come for you, my dear. Watching you rise from a brash young lieutenant to the woman you are today is one of the few things in my years of service that has given me any cause for sincere hope. And Tyrion picked you. That has to count for something. Now you sit at a fine intersection. The highest-ranking Blues Royal and nominal commander of the Snake Eaters. That's quite a sphere of influence. And you're Gemini. There was a time when 80% of this regiment was Gemini. Annika Hess was Gemini and a skull taker. Are you telling me to become a skull taker? But at this he shakes his head, quite sincerely. No, the grunts can believe what they want. But it's a foolish totem, born of stupidity and ego. Still, any man that wears this cord is my brother. She nods. But tell me, just one more thing. She holds her cards up to him, a natural 12 again. Do you always deal? He smirks like a grandfather playing with a new child. What can I say, Sia? They're my cards. She makes small talk for a few more moments before begging off. But in Sato voice, DuPont had presented her with the facts and set her down the path in words overlapping a central, unnamed theme. Skull takers and suspicion and the household guard. Samuel Nam. Returning to the stateroom that doubles as his office, Commissar Renault finds a green apple placed upon his desk, and he grins ear to ear, though the fellow has cut it remarkably close, here. Taking the apple up, it is a rare piece of fruit of incredible quality. He holds it aloft, searching for flaws, and finding none he applies a clean and even pressure with his augmentic limb and crushes the fruit to pulp. Incredibly sensitive feedback pads find the spool quickly, and he delicately extracts it from the mash of crushed fruit. Sitting at his desk, he shakes the debris from his gloved hand and unspools the sugar filament secreted within, and lays it across his desk lamp's shade to project the dossier against the far wall. This had come to Delaclos by way of a contact he had within the Arbites, for whom he would in exchange release the man's brother from his posting in a penal legion. He'd probably have to direct the man's entire company to a reserve depot to throw off suspicions, but that wasn't a big deal. He wasn't sure if he would follow through on that commitment, but reading the collected files, he knows that he must. Before him is 6 weeks of Guild-certified genealogical research, cross-referenced and confirmed by said Arbites. And the map before him has never before been so straightforward. House Alaklos had sponsored patents of nobility on 4 retainer houses. Of those, 2 were extinct. The third emigrated off Terra and, per the terms of their patent, had therefore forfeit all rights, rents, and privileges of stewardship. This left the fourth, House Carino, as the sole inheritor of all of the estates, properties, and incomes originating with House Alaklos. One of those sinecures is the family seat amongst the imperial senate that Carino has occupied in trust. He takes out a sheet of one-time paper and peels back the blackout cover. He writes the transfer order out very quickly, addressed to a colleague he is deep in the Munitorum sector bureaucracy. In every probability, the soldier is already dead. But still, in the note he asks his cutout to push through a transfer in exchange for a favor he will gladly honor. He signs his name and allows the blackout cover to close again. When the cover is next removed, ideally by the astropaths aboard ship, they will translate the message, and then, after a minute's contact with the air, the paper will begin to smolder and curl before crumbling away into curling motes of black carbon, never to be seen again. He sits there, so utterly pleased, so utterly confident. He cradles his beloved plasma pistol. Coming off this op, his sponsors owe him some many favors. Maneuvering him back to Terra to declare his claim will be no trouble. But thinking of his sponsors, that perfect confidence is checked by a moment of indecisiveness. He's insecure for what feels like the first time in his life. But how he loves to be thorough. He takes out a second sheet of one-time paper and peels back the blackout cover. Scion Strike Garrison 436 Tonto. Precinct House Gigaseptus is compromised. Deploy immediately. Terminate authority with ultimate disdain. Erectus exterminatus. No evidence. I was never here. I did not say this. Lady Inquisitor Angarrathja. He closes the blackout cover and sets it into his correspondence pile with all the other outgoing orders. Este will retrieve it in the morning and make the delivery, and that will be that. Though really, there ought to be a more secure system for this. A knock at his door moments later summons him to conference.